20 years ago today, Tony Blair became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom with an absolutely humongous parliamentary majority after what can only be described as a completely brilliant campaign, full of optimism, full of this new idea that had been cooked up by Blair, Campbell and Mandelson of the third way. New politics, new Britain. This is what it sounded like. I remember Neil Kinnock dancing to this, John Prescott jigging around. I mean, it was so brilliant, I almost believed it myself. Things can only get better. And that next morning, in Downing Street, the sun was shining. And for those of you not old enough to remember this, I've never seen anything like it before in British politics, and I doubt we'll ever see anything like it again. He was greeted by the crowds and by the media. It was almost as if it was the second coming of the Lord. This was Blair today responding to that bright sunny morning.
I was surprised by it, yeah, but on the other hand, it had become pretty clear during the course of the campaign that we were very likely to win, but we'd lost 4 elections and we've been out of power for almost 2 decades. I was so keen that we were not complacent that I virtually obliterated, even from my own mind, the prospect of how large the majority would be.
So it was brand new politics. It wasn't left-wing, it wasn't right-wing. It was in many ways a response to the fact that socialism was seen to have failed and that actually many of the doctrines of Thatcher had now become part of the mainstream debate in British politics, and effectively Blair went with them. So suddenly the Labour Party was not perceived to be a threat to business, and there was what was known as the prawn cocktail offensive, where Gordon Brown and others went round city boardrooms and business boardrooms promising, we will, as a Labour Party, not put up tax, so nothing to be scared of. And of course the Tories had been in power for 18 years, and to be frank, John Major's party was split down the middle over the question of Europe. We saw the emergence in that time of Jimmy Goldsmith Referendum Party, of UKIP. The party was in real trouble. But it was only a few years in to Blair's term when we had the really dramatic, horrendous events of 9/11. And I think it was the response to 9/11 in many ways that I think has shaped, at least I believe has shaped, perhaps our dominant long-term view of who Tony Blair is. Here's Blair talking about extremism.
I saw this Islamist threat from, I think, quite an early stage and believed it was much more profound than we thought. And so when 9/11 happened, which at the time was an event that didn't just shock the world, it traumatized it. And I saw that as the culmination of a process that had built up over time and a huge, but you can't go back and, take a different decision and see how it would have turned out.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons.
I mean, the problem with all of that is that, what you were saying turned out to be wrong, didn't it?
Yeah, and, there's never enough times that you can apologise for the intelligence being wrong, but that was the intelligence we were given, and we were given it, by the way, for a very simple reason. He was the one leader in the world who'd actually used WMD since the Second World War.
I sensed, during that part of the interview, that Blair was very much on the back foot and indeed looked pretty shifty. He knows himself, and he must hate it, but he knows himself that the one issue that defines him in the minds of the British public is that decision to go to war in Iraq. Not, of course, that the British people are pacifists. In fact, far from it. We're perfectly happy to intervene militarily. We just want to be told the truth about why we're doing it. And I think there's a feeling that whilst he says the intelligence was wrong, I think there's a feeling that actually it was Campbell, the dodgy dossier, that they basically cooked the books to try and persuade Parliament to vote the way that they did. But that's a bad memory, but there'll be many listening to this show tonight who will have some good memories of Tony Blair, of some of the changes that he made, and difficult not to say that British society didn't change. Blair had some very proud moments through this, and he was indeed. I mean, one of his big things was that he wanted us to change the way we managed immigration in this country. We had, since the early 1950s, until Blair got elected, run pretty consistently with net migration running at 30,000 people a year. It had been that for about 50 years. But Blair thought it was time to open Britain up. He thought we needed more people. He thought we needed more young people. He thought, actually, that the diversity in society would be a good thing. I mean, they even boasted, New Labour, about rubbing the noses of the right in diversity. And I think this is another controversial thing, but one that he still today believes has been an absolutely massive success. Here he is on that subject.
I do think we underestimated the numbers of people, but it was a completely different situation in 2004. And by the way, never forget, this is what's so extraordinary to me about this current situation. Enlargement of the European Union, bringing Eastern Europe into Europe, was a huge positive thing.
Well, Blair, completely unapologetic about all of that. But there are other things, other changes in society that Blair, and perhaps again, Adam Bolton from Sky News had him a bit on the back foot on immigration. But here's Blair on the front foot, talking about his proudest achievements as Prime Minister.
Obviously, there's things like there's lots of different things. I mean, I think you could talk about the changes we made socially in terms of attitudes to race, to women's equality, to gay rights. Obviously, there's things like the Good Friday Agreement that we've talked about. You know, I think we did make big improvements. I mean, if you take the satisfaction ratings when we left office in the health service, you know, we did turn the health service around, which is why it's such a tragedy it's in the state it is today. I'm very proud of what we did on overseas aid. I mean, we didn't just treble aid. We brought in program, we created the Department of International Development.
And in fact, many of the things that Blair did and Blair was proudest of, in fact, David Cameron did continue. Of that, there's no question. So did he make the country a better or worse place? And, you know, if you think that Blair was actually a massive, transformative figure in this country that modernised our society, that opened it up, then do call me on 0345 6060 973. If you think he was a disaster and he broke down trust between people and politicians, text at 84850. And as ever, you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. I'm going to go to Anthony in Watford as my first caller of the evening. Anthony, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Blair a good thing or a bad thing?
Best thing that's ever happened to this country.
Oh, wow. OK. Go on, please.
I'm a Thatcherite from the top of my head to the bottom of my toes.
Yes.
I spoke to you some weeks ago. I'm a staunch Remainer.
Yes.
Thank God, Tony, thank God he's coming back into the ring. You've done more damage to this country, I said to you some weeks ago, than Oliver Cromwell. Your words, not mine. The EEC is a fantastic idea gone wrong. Our last generation gave their lives for a free Europe. Now's not the time to turn it back on Europe.
Yes, they did, Anthony. They gave it for a free democratic Europe of independent nation states that couldn't be dominated by anybody big.
But I'm 48% of the country that want to remain. I'm even trying to say in public I'm a Remainer. Oh, you're a moaner, are you? That's insulting. I've got a view. I've got an opinion. I love my country. Tony Bean, get back in there. Tony Blair, get back in there.
If you love your country, Anthony,
I do.
Why do you want it to be governed by somebody else?
I think there's only strength is unity. And the EC, I think, is a fantastic idea. It's got some problems. I'll give you that. Nigel, get back in there and do the best you can for Europe. Get the best you can for my country. I've got nothing wrong with asking people to know, what do you want to come to our country for? Holiday? Fine. I'm sorry, you've got a prison record. You're not allowed in our country. There's nothing wrong with border controls. Nothing wrong with that at all. But there's going to be... We've jumped off the cliff and we're now starting to understand.
You and I don't agree on that. But let's get back to Blair. You know, and you've said he was one of the best things that ever happened to this country. So Blair, he did make it pretty clear today that he's closing down all his business interests. And boy, he's had a pretty good run for the last 10 years, according to all financial accounts. He's going to get back in politics. He said he wouldn't stand in this general election. So I wonder, Anthony, if Blair was poised and waiting for Corbyn to have a very bad election, and then either to try and take on the leadership of the Labour Party or perhaps to sort of do a modern-day Roy Jenkins. And because one of the things he bemoaned today was that the centre wasn't holding, and that the politics of right and left was growing. So maybe what he's thinking is he'll do what Roy Jenkins did all those years ago and set up a new form of SDP. Would you welcome Blair coming back to lead a political party in Britain?
Right, yes, I would.
Right.
I'll tell you why. Because you'll give the general public a chance to think of what they're doing. Why haven't we got a choice to think if it's the right thing? If the country say, look, it's definitely the right thing, we've got to get out. Fine, I'll shut up. But we've been told lies and lies and lies. We haven't been told the truth.
We've had 50 years of lies, Anthony. We were told it was a common market, and they've lied to us ever since. Anthony, listen, we're not going to agree on that point, but you think Blair should come back. It's very, very interesting. Freddie in Chelmsford, Blair, a good thing or bad thing? Is the country better or worse?
A bad thing, Nigel. A very much a bad thing. Mm-hmm. When he was elected, we'd had 18 years of John Major and previous to him, Margaret Thatcher.
Yep.
My dad and I used to sit down the pub saying how terrible they were, and we were desperate for a Labour Party, a Labour government. And he came along, and I thought, this guy looks wonderful. And then he won the election overwhelmingly, and as the years rolled by, he did nothing for working people. I was Labour all my life, and he single-handedly destroyed my faith in the Labour Party, him alone. And when he was going on and on about weapons of mass destruction, I'm just an ordinary guy on the street, but I thought, he's talking a load of rubbish, absolute rubbish. And sure enough, it turned out to be a load of rubbish. I'm nobody, nothing.
Funny, Freddie, wasn't it? A lot of, as you put it, ordinary working people felt Blair did nothing for them. But an awful lot of people through PFI deals and huge public sector jobs and big bosses. Actually, it was the rich who, I think, view Tony Blair as a hero.
Exactly. And more than that, he was just an actor. He was a complete actor. I saw him standing at the coffin of King Hussein of Jordan, was it? It was him, Clinton, someone else, and they were trying to outdo each other in terms of miseryness. And I thought, he's this policeman. He's trying to put on this.
I tell you what, Freddie. I tell you what, Freddie. If you're right, and he was an actor, I'll tell you something, he was a very good one. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. 20 years since Tony Blair won a landslide, dramatic victory back in 1997. Because that wasn't the only victory he had. He won 3 general elections. And he then resigned in 2007. Yes, besmirched by the Iraq War. But he resigned that apart, at the top of his game, and handed over the poison chalice to Gordon Brown, because a year later the financial markets collapsed and we finished up having to bail out the banks and much else. So the one thing you've got to say about Blair, if, as our caller before the break said, he was just an actor, well, he was a very, very good one. And his sense of timing in getting out was astonishing. It was once said by Enoch Powell that all political careers end in failure unless cut off in midstream. And Blair got out at the right time. And now he's hinted pretty strongly today that he might come back. Fascinating. Fire on Facebook says Blair is the best. We need him back. Nicola says Blair must take responsibility for the Iraq disaster. A lot of people think that. But he doesn't, does he? He says he had the intelligence. He apologises that it was wrong. He did what he thought was right. Tina says Blair wanted multicultural Britain. Now we have an overcrowded, divided Britain. Hi, Nigel. I never voted for Blair, and I don't want him back in any form. He ruined our country and caused a lot of heartache to many. That's from Anne in Blackburn. Good evening, Nigel. I'm wondering why Blair met with Tim Farron recently. Perhaps to be his advisor on remaining or something else. What do you think, Maggie? Maggie, I think what you got today was perhaps a coded message. And why else would you close down all of your business interests if, without having to work too hard, they're bringing you in an awful lot of money, unless you were seriously considering a return to British politics? I just wonder whether he's limbering up for something. I wonder what Danny in Woking makes of that. Danny, good evening.
Hiya, Nigel.
So what do you think?
Well, I think there's 2 things that I reckon Tony's thinking about when he's talking about returning to politics. I think the first thing is, obviously, with the Brexit vote, there's a whole lot of people concerned about immigration. And it seems that the right are winning the debate in this country. I'm sure that's music to your ears, that the right are winning the debate in this country. And I think what he'll want to do when he sort of returns to politics is ensure that the middle ground, as people call it, doesn't shift further to the right, that all the debate is focused on the sort of Islam immigration type debate, and that we talk about other things, even though that is the pressing issue at the moment.
But Danny, don't you think the old left-right debate's a bit out of the window these days?
No, I don't think so. I think it still has huge relevance. I mean, what we've got at the moment, very clearly, is we've got someone on the left who the right call a dinosaur, and someone on the right who the left call a fascist. And I don't agree with that, obviously, but certain people in the left do say those sort of things. And I think there is a clear, I think whether or not it's necessarily left and right, there is a clear divide in opinion in this country. And I think what Blair wants to do is to say, hang on, we can sort of reconsider here, we can bring it back to where it was 10 years ago. And that's fine, but the issue is, as someone who's sort of a Labour supporter, who is a Labour member, the issue is, for me, is right before a general election, I'm more to the centre than the Labour Party currently is. But does that mean that I want Tony Blair saying, do not vote for Corbyn because it's going to be a disaster? Essentially,
he didn't do that, did he? Come on, let's be fair. I mean, I know it was pretty lukewarm, but he did say, I want people to vote Labour. I mean, it was through gritted teeth, Danny, I grant you. But he wasn't
I'm talking about the possibilities if he does return of what he's thinking and what his actions will be. Because
Danny,
I love Tony Blair, but I don't think that...
Danny, let's put this to you. Let's say the current opinion polls are right. Let's say Theresa May wins a majority of 150. That the Labour Party has its sort of worst ever performance since the 1930s, right? Yeah. In those circumstances, would you, as somebody who says and self-declares to be more towards the centre than the current Labour Party is under Corbyn, would you want Blair back as your leader?
I don't think that we could have Blair back as our leader, simply because the Labour Party is, or proclaims to be, the party of the working class. And I think what Blair what Blair did was a very admirable thing in saying, we have to appeal to the working class, but we have to appeal to the middle class as well. And I think it's not. There's a balance between policy and personality, obviously, in politics. And the thing is with Blair is that a lot of his policies were fantastic. I mean, things about extra teachers, support staff in the NHS, all that kind of stuff. But you can't be...
But that's fine, Danny. But isn't the point? His image isn't the point. Isn't the point that amongst that working class base, a lot of them defected to UKIP. A lot of them, even though Corbyn may be more on the left, but a lot of them do not find his sort of North London intellectual socialism appealing in any way at all. Yeah. And actually, isn't the Labour Party's real problem that whether it's Corbyn leading it or Blair leading it, that working class vote just doesn't connect anymore with Labour?
That's what I was going to say, is Blair might have a lot of policies that did actually work for working class people, but it's very much overshadowed by immigration, the Iraq War,
absolutely,
and also the personality debate, in that I don't think that Blair could rescue the Labour Party simply because of what his public image is. I think if they found a new, fresh candidate from wherever they could find it that had the same sort of policy and personality as Blair, but wasn't actually so dodgy, if you don't mind me using that word in a way, because that's what people think he is.
Well, they do, I'm afraid. No, look, I think, Danny, he broke down trust. Whatever people said about John Major, they never called him a liar. And actually, after the Iraq War, people called Blair a liar, and I think there was a breakdown of trust, Danny. And I also think that with Campbell and Mandelson, they ushered in an area of spin where it all became style over substance. And look at this general election today. I mean, amazing, isn't it? When the Prime Minister is asked what she thought about a mugwump, and she says, what this country needs is strong and stable leadership, not a coalition of chaos. And that was the politics, Danny, that Blair, Campbell and Mandelson gave us. I thank you for your call. Clive says to me on Facebook, Blair was one of the most successful premiers of the 20th century. No recessions, massive school building with hospital expansions. Commentators on the far left are deluded. Yes, Clive, the recession started a year after he'd resigned. I wonder whether he saw it coming. And as for hospital expansion, done under PFI deals, which made a lot of people in the private sector benefit hugely out of the National Health Service and have left many of our hospitals with such massive repayments they're struggling to provide basic patient care today. I'm going to ask Chris in Isleworth whether he thinks Blair made this country a better place.
I think he did, Nigel. Well, you say PFI was a failure, but still,
disaster.
But the NHS, the best sort of user satisfaction was under Blair. He brought up the hospitals, the buildings and the infrastructure. They had funding. They didn't have any doctor strikes under him. Now we're getting them.
Yeah, but Chris, you know, and you're right, a deal was cut with the GPs, particularly with Blair, where their pay increased massively, and they were very, very happy indeed. But, I mean, isn't it ironic that it is the Labour Party who set the National Health Service up, who still at every election say, you've got to vote Labour because we founded the National Health Service. Wouldn't privatisation be awful? Actually, in lots of ways, Blair not only privatised chunks of the National Health Service, but encouraged a lot of private finance to make huge sums of money out of the rebuilding of those hospitals.
He used public finance. He used the private finances, but he would never in his life ever trying to privatise it. And
Chris, they did. The Labour years saw 5% of National Health Services outsourced to private companies.
No. The National Health was always safe under Tony Blair, and it's always safe under Labour. And I want to take you back on one thing. Don't mock Tony Blair about his business finances.
I didn't.
Because you did. You said, oh, he's made a lot of money. But at least
he's done very well.
Yes, and he's run them successfully.
So why, Chris? Oh, fine. Look, I wasn't mocking him. I said
you were mocking him,
No, I wasn't. I said he's done extremely well. But what I did say, Chris, that fascinates me is why, when you've set that network up, and when you've got that level of income, you know, coming in, well, you can go and give a speech in, you know, Azerbaijan or whatever it is, or America, and get 100,000 quid for doing it. Why would you close all of that down unless actually you really were seriously thinking of a return to politics? And Chris, I think he is going to come back to British politics after this election, but my suspicion is that it won't be through the Labour Party, because I don't think the current Labour membership would have him.
It's a pity they wouldn't, but I think, Nigel, you're a businessman. You know it. What other prime minister or major political party is going to do a speech for free? Your friend Trump will do a lot more.
No, Chris, we're not knocking it. You know, Blair went off and made tens of millions. All right, fine. Blair is an incredibly capable and able person. Chris, when he was president in office for 6 months of the European Union for the last 6 months of 2005, I spent a lot of time with him at lunches, breakfast, dinners, briefings, chats, face-to-face debates. In fact, I'm one of the few people who's ever made Tony Blair shout, and he shouted at me quite loudly at a public meeting in Christmas 2005. Chris, I do not for 1 minute, Chris, doubt this man's ability. I don't. I think in terms of a performer, he's the best we've seen in modern times. What I doubt is whether he was a success as a Prime Minister, and I don't think he was, and I think he did break down trust between voters and politics and brought a new form of cynicism in.
No, he made change for good. Everyone always goes back to Iraq. What about Bosnia? He went in there and saved those Muslims in that country when no one else wanted to help them.
Well, the problem was that it was the perceived success of Bosnia that led him, I think, to believe that he was invincible in terms of foreign and military policy. And after that, there was no stopping him. Chris, I thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and it's Bank Holiday Monday, and a lot of you are sitting in motor cars coming back from a day out at the seaside. You've got wet waterproofs and boots in the back, and many of you probably haven't listened to this show before, but I'm here every night from Monday through Thursday, and I'm happy to take on people who support what I've done in the past or who despise what I've done in the past. And of course, I suppose the main area for me has been the European Union. And whilst we're discussing tonight, 20 years on, whether Blair was a success or a failure, difficult not to make a comment about the reports that have appeared in a German newspaper. And this is a phone conversation that has taken place between Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, the man who every month comes to the European Parliament and sits in seat number 21, and I sit in seat number 20. So I've got to know the bloke quite well over the years. And he said to Merkel that the dinner with Theresa May in number 10 Downing Street was all a bit of a disaster. He said Mrs May is living in another galaxy and deluding herself. He was even rude about the food, playing to a sort of classic European stereotype of what the Brits are. And, you know, one thing that we learn from this is that no negotiations with these people will ever take place in secret, and that we're not dealing, frankly, with honourable people. They are not prepared to play this with a straight bat. And I think it's a big lesson, an object lesson to Mrs May, that actually anything that is said in private will be briefed out. They are kind of stuck in this mindset. They're stuck in this mentality that says that whatever happens, they mustn't be nice to the Brits. Well, history tells us when they're rude about us and abusive about us, it makes us even more determined. But back to Mr Blair. And Mr Blair, who has hinted strongly today that he intends to return to British politics. He's closed down his business interests. Steve on Facebook says the UK needs Blair to bring us back together again to fight the modern day threats. Robert says Blair created the situation for bankruptcy and then bailed out just before it went wrong. Well, he did get out spectacularly well in 2007 before everything hit the fan in 2008. I'm going to ask Steve in Stanmore, did Tony Blair make this country better, Steve?
No, Nigel.
Right.
I did vote for him in his first term of office.
Yes.
I cried with tears of joy, believing that he was going to create... Remember he said, working for a fairer Britain?
Yes.
Then if you noticed in the next two terms, they dropped that phrase to Britain is working. Yes. His legacy is, after 13 years' rule, if you don't take the low wage, we'll get someone in from Poland.
Well, he did say today, actually, that they slightly underestimated the numbers that would come because the official figure was 13,000 a year.
Yes.
But to be fair, the mass immigration that Tony Blair gave us didn't just come from the European Union, because as many people came to Britain from outside the European Union as came from within.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm just using that as a...
Sure.
Personally against Poles, but just as a phrase of, you know, as you know, it was people questioned that the Poles were the first that people in this country noticed.
So is to you, Steve, is immigration and the change in people's incomes, is that his biggest failure?
Yes.
It is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
Even bigger than Iraq?
Yeah. No, that's not an issue for me.
Right, okay.
Not an issue in any shape or form. It's uncontrolled, and I qualify that phrase, uncontrolled, like you do yourself, uncontrolled immigration.
Yes.
They did not plan. We have got a housing shortage, where the NHS is stretched, and I blame Tony Blair for the mess that this country is in.
Steve, that point couldn't be clearer. Thank you. Douglas is calling from Denmark. So, Blair, 20 years on, success or failure, Douglas?
Well, I think it's a question of personal taste. If I can be a bit frank and say, let's be optimistic and say the majority of people believed he did a good job. I'll put that to one side. The point I wanted to make was, I've lived in Denmark for 10 years. I still follow politics very closely. And I served in Iraq in 2005.
Yep.
I had no problem with doing that. And obviously it's debate about the weapons of mass destruction. And that's part of the package as a soldier. You do your duty. So I'm very proud to have a medal on my chest. My point is this. I think it's extremely unacceptable now that Blair comes out and says, well, the people who were voted to leave, they still didn't know what they were voting for. And that's what I find quite disgusting, to be honest.
Do you? Go on, why?
Well, because how can you on the one hand talk badly about the people who voted to say they still didn't know what they were voting for, it's still not late to stop Brexit, but on the other hand, you can accept the fact that people like me and thousands of other men and women will happily serve on his behalf in the army. And I think that's the irony of the situation.
So he sort of really has his own form of democracy, doesn't he? That he likes some results, but if it doesn't go his way, he disrespects it, and effectively says sort of either we've all been conned or we're all stupid.
Absolutely. I think it would be a step backwards if he returns to British politics.
Douglas, again, another caller whose point couldn't be clearer, and thank you. Nigel, the return of Tony Blair, he has the charisma of a double-glazing salesman. Every time I see or hear Blair, I think past the sick bucket, says Roger in Ruislip, very helpfully. Well, Roger, like it or not, I think he's limbering for a comeback, and perhaps a big one, if Labour do very badly in this election on the 8th of June. Conrad in Bristol. Was he good for the country? Was he bad for the country? Was he a bit of both?
Well, good evening, Nigel. It's lovely to speak to you. I'm an enormous fan. What I would say is this. He did have some successes on domestic policy. He did some things which were very good for this country. He was undoubtedly an enormous success in the brand of politics that he brought forward, keeping those sort of Thatcherite free market economics. But at the same time...
Isn't it ironic, Conrad? Isn't it ironic that we're getting people ringing up saying Blair was a really good Thatcherite?
Well, yeah, it's funny. It's true, of course. I studied politics. It could not be truer that he bought into that brand of politics. The fact that he got people like my father, who's an investment banker who works for Goldman Sachs, to vote for him over and over again. He became a Labour Party donor. That sort of tells part of the story. But then we look at things like Iraq, the European Union. He should have offered this country a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. He should have done that. I mean, obviously that came to Gordon Brown and because he stepped down slightly before that. But the fact is he willfully deceived the British people with the Lisbon Treaty. On immigration, he didn't have a clue what he was doing. The underestimates of how many people would come here from Eastern Europe, that was a total disaster to this country. And undoubtedly Iraq. I mean, that is the biggest one for me. I mean, how many people died over there in Iraq? I mean, just an absolute disaster. I recently watched the documentary The Killings of Tony Blair by George Galloway. And, if you watch that, it could not be clearer. I mean, I understand that is a bit biased, but it's a very, very compelling case.
I mean, George does have a very strong point of view.
Yeah, of course, but it is a very compelling case, and you see people like David Davis, the Brexit secretary, talking in there. So it's a very compelling case. Yeah.
So, Conrad, you said your father became a Labour donor, and if you asked him what was Blair's biggest success, what would he say? Do you think?
Well, I really do struggle with that because I mean, we don't get along at all. I'm sort of a conservative, but I also lean towards UKIP, whereas he is very much a Blairite man. So we sort of have there's a big disagreement in the family.
Don't discuss politics at Sunday lunch, Conrad. Is that really the lesson from this?
That's very reasonable. Yeah, exactly. I really struggle to understand, but I think ultimately, as a banker, I think he must look at Blair and think that his biggest successes are on the economy. But what he doesn't seem to understand, what I think, is that his economic policies were really Thatcherite economic policies, and that begs the question: why aren't you a conservative then?
Yeah, and then, of course, at the end of his time, we saw Cameron and Osborne leading the opposition and actually willingly describing themselves as heir to Blair. So it was politics had come so much to the centre that it was actually quite difficult to work out who was on the left, who was on the right, and we finished up with the politics, I think, of very little choice. And I suspect that the rise of the SNP and the rise of UKIP and the rise of single-issue politics is actually as a direct result of what Blair did, because we stopped having proper choices in elections. Conrad, fascinating call. Kyle in Norwich, did he make this a better country or a worse one?
I think, in all fairness, he's made an absolute worse one. I mean, every dog has a day, and I think you can apply that doctrine to prime ministers. And quite frankly, the way he handled the Iraq war is unforgivable, and I think he can't redeem himself from this. And I think if he's going to return to politics, then he's got another thing coming. No one is ever going to have him back, whether you're Conservative or Labour, and I think he's an absolute disgrace of a person.
Wow, strong opinion, but he sees himself, I think, a bit like General de Gaulle did in France when he sort of went into his sort of period of isolation down in Lorraine and waited for the country to call him back. And I think what Blair is hinting at is that there isn't anybody out there in the Remainer camp who, frankly, has the stature to lead a really big fight back on this. And I think he sees himself as a British de Gaulle. That's what I think, Carl.
Yeah. I remember just a little while ago you touched on Juncker. I mean, I'm a pro-Brexit conservative, but I'm sick to the back teeth of Juncker talking to the British public like he does and undermining everything we do. He's the face of the European Union. No wonder why people don't like them. No wonder why people, the whole
because they're bullies, bullies, and they're thugs. And I called them. I said the other week in Parliament that I thought they were behaving like the mafia. I said, you're demanding a ransom from us as if we're hostages. We're not. We're a free country. And I got ticked off by the President of the European Parliament, who was Italian. I said, well, I'm very sorry if I've used the word mafia, and I apologise for any cultural sensitivities. I'll just call you a bunch of gangsters instead. And
just know this, Nigel. I'm 100% behind you in what you do. I think you're a fantastic person. Keep on doing what you're doing. Carl, you've got my full support.
You're very kind. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I've had some interactions with Tony Blair. I've seen this business of style and substance and result, and I'll talk about that, but not right now because you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC, and it's 7:45. 20 years ago, the music was playing, things could only get better, the sun was shining, thousands of people were thronging Downing Street, and if you watch the BBC, it was like the second coming of the Lord. And 20 years on, we're analysing, did he make the country a better or a worse place? My main interaction with him was in the last half of 2005, when he was, for 6 months, the president of the European Council, the rotating 6-month presidency. And I think my experience with him during that time said everything. He was, at all times, utterly charming. He displayed a very good sense of humour, of that was no doubt, and at times a self-deprecating sense of humour. He would stand up, and I'd see him in Brussels, but equally in the House of Commons. He'd stand up and tell a joke against himself if things hadn't gone very well, and the public rather liked that, and he was good at that and clever at that. So he arrived in Brussels, and he was deeply unpopular because of the Iraq War. He walked into a hostile European Parliament. He gave a 35, 40-minute speech without any notes. It finished with a huge standing ovation. He was a star. He was a brilliant performer. I think actually in political terms, the best that I've ever seen. He then launched upon this project of saying, in his 6 months, he was going to reform the European Union, and in particular, the common agricultural policy. This is what he was going to do. And at the end of that 6 months, and it was the week of Christmas, and it was the very last meeting of the governments, and they were up all night, literally up all night. And Blair walked in to a press briefing with MEPs, and I could see he basically hadn't been to bed at all. He looked haggard. The Foreign Office looked embarrassed. Mind you, throughout their history, they often look embarrassed because they get almost everything wrong. And he gave this press conference, having just given away £7 billion of the British rebate in return for no reform of the agricultural policy at all, but the French promising they might have a look at it in a few years' time. And I said to him in my little intervention, I said, look, unlike you, President Chirac actually stands up for his national interest. I said, and he's outclassed you and outplayed you at every twist and turn. And in response, he went absolutely puce. And he pointed his finger at me and he shouted, this isn't 1945. We're not at war with these people anymore. They're our friends. And I think I'm the only person he's ever actually shouted at. And what we're going to do is on lbc.co.uk, after this show, we will put those clips up so that you can watch that and see it. It's a long time ago, 2005. What I learned from it was that when it comes to style, when it comes to presentation, no one better than Blair, certainly not in my lifetime. When it comes to delivery, I think it's all been rather disappointing. But there we are. John says Tony Blair's university policies dumb down the educational system. Michelle says Tony Blair, globalist puppet and promoter of the New World Order. Joan feels even more strongly. She says Blair spent our money in war, got a lot of innocent people killed, and he should be prosecuted. That's strong stuff. I wonder what Darren in Knightsbridge thinks. Do you think he was a success, Darren? And should he make a dramatic return to British politics?
I look forward to those videos, Nigel. Public enemy number one, Tony Blair, a globalist and a professional corporate lobbyist. I don't trust him. I don't believe he's given up last time I checked, he was earning £37,000 a day from two big banks. I don't believe that he's just given that up. I believe he's still be working for them in some capacity. So I believe that that's what how we should look at him these days. And of course, the other thing that he's doing, he's like there's a pattern here, Nigel. Every time we get around the table and talk about something important, he always chips in. He's been doing it quite regularly. The reason he does that is he's trying desperately to rebrand the Tony Blair the Tony Blair name. Ever since the revelations a few months ago about his despot spin doctrine work that he did, his brand has completely collapsed. So that's his motivation here. He has no loyalty to this country, to any political party. He doesn't even have a loyalty to Europe. And I've got a question for you, Nigel.
Yep.
When Greece was brought into the European Union and it had no money and it really shouldn't have been a player, but it was convinced to borrow money from big American banks, was it Tony Blair who was the broker that he was the one that was doing the business there between the European Union and these big banks? And
I doubt that, Darren. I doubt that very much indeed, because Greece actually joined the European Union back in 81, I think it was. But when Greece joined the euro, Blair was the British Prime Minister, and I very much doubt he would have played a brokerage role in that. But what Blair believed then and believes now is that the euro was a good thing, and he was desperate to get the United Kingdom to join the euro. And thank goodness we didn't. So if he was wrong about the biggest economic decision this country's had to take post-1945, why would we trust his view now, Darren?
Exactly. And of course, there's the other thing that's been in the papers, but not in the media high profile, is this recent Attorney General case. They're blocking a court case against him from an aggression claim of a crime. And it's our country.
Darren, you know, we have to be careful about some of this stuff, but I do take it you feel very strongly about Blair, as indeed does James, who texts me. Blair's legacy is that he has destroyed trust in politics in this country. I kind of was heading a bit, James, in that direction earlier, wasn't I? I'm going to ask Robert in Basildon, is this country a better place 20 years on from Blair's election?
Hello, Mr. Farage. It's an absolute pleasure being on your show for a start. I do believe that Blair was a good Prime Minister. I sincerely believe that. For a start, he was very pro-factory economics as another...
This is hilarious, Robert. It's really very, very funny, but go on, keep going.
Well, for a start, he was economically on the right and socially on the left. For me, that mix is not a good one. As for economics, I do believe that he was a good Prime Minister. Socially, no. He dragged us into the Iraq War, which turned out to be an absolute disaster and sparked what we still have today, many years later, of course. And he gave light to the opposition that is Labour. Obviously, that's been torn down by Jeremy Corbyn today. However, he did revitalise Labour. With the new Labour movement, he finally gave hope to the opposition. And again, we were arguably a democracy because we had a strong opposition. And a strong opposition is, of course, important to democracy.
Well, he put together, Robert, the most phenomenal election machine any of us have seen in our lifetimes. They were very, very good at it, weren't they?
Definitely. But I do believe that he revitalised Westminster and that he gave the opposition a new breath of fresh air. Today, he's kind of gone off the radar for, so many years now. And so for him suddenly popping up and trying to introduce himself back into politics is, in my opinion, an absolute mistake. He's going to get dragged through the mud a million times. He's going to get called a war criminal and all these other things.
A bit like the heavyweight boxer who's spent all his money and decides to make a comeback and gets knocked out. Unlike our new heavyweight champion Joshua, who, wow, if any of you saw it at the weekend, it was something special. Robert, I thank you. James in Harrogate, did Blair make this a better or worse country?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I think he was potentially the worst person that's ever happened to this country. He opened up the borders without asking. If we'd said yes, fair enough, but he didn't ask us. He sent all the kids to university to study ologies, giving them false hope, people from working class backgrounds. They weren't necessarily academic. They all studied ology. They came out, 3-4 years later with 25 grand worth of debt, working in bars alongside Eastern Europeans who had just come across. People don't actually understand with the PFI deals how much he indebted this country with what he did. People don't actually. I know David Cameron. I know what he did in 2012. People need to understand how Cameron opened up the National Health Service, but it all started with Tony Blair, carried on by Cameron, and the demographic changes, the amount of people who have left London and moved up to, say, Yorkshire or Manchester because, there were 11, different languages being spoken in schools. I mean, the demographic changes. He compressed wages with open door immigration. The working classes, I suppose he helped Eastern Europe. I suppose he helped.
He didn't only give them jobs, but he was also very happy, as those of you that watch the clip after the show will see. I said to him, why are you sending taxpayers' money to rebuild the underground system in Warsaw when our Victorian system is creaking at the fringes? James, you've read out a very long charge sheet against Tony Blair. I would say as a final thought, look, make no mistake about it, in terms of being a political speaker and an operator, and in terms of building an image, there's nobody been better in my lifetime. But this victory of style over substance and the introduction of spin to British politics, I think, brought a whole new level of cynicism to politics. And in the end, I think broke down trust. Is he going to come back? Well, this Labour Party, with its current membership, wouldn't have him. So is he going to come back after the election like Roy Jenkins in 1981 and launch a new social democratic party? I don't know. Be jolly exciting if he did. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I'm here Monday to Thursday from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you, Nigel. And we're going to talk about the current Labour Party, the new Labour.
Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody. Well, there's no doubt about one thing. It's been LBC and Nick Ferrari's day. Perhaps you've been stuck in the office all day, working hard, and you haven't heard. But there was a remarkable interview that took place this morning on The Breakfast Show on LBC, where Diane Abbott struggled terribly with her basic arithmetic as to what it would cost to employ 10,000 new police officers. And it's been dominating the national news everywhere, all day. And a bit later on in the programme would analyse whether, in her defence after the interview, frankly, she was telling the truth or not. Plus, we'll also catch up at 30:30 on what the other parties have been up to today all around the country. I guess, given that the May Day bank holiday is out of the way, I guess in a way the general election proper has started today. And over the course of the next few weeks, I want to hear all of your opinions, and I promise you I will not attempt during this election period to impose mine upon you. I really won't. It'll be very difficult, but I promise I won't. But coming up first, you must have seen over the weekend that if you want to have a quiet, confidential dinner and you don't want the contents of it to be leaked to national newspapers, then don't invite Jean-Claude Juncker and the gang to Downing Street, because the weekend was dominated by him saying that Mrs May was living in a different galaxy, that the Brits simply didn't understand what the Brexit process was all about. But a new twist on this story emerged today. And I think the newspaper that had the best of it was indeed the Daily Telegraph. And the story is that basically the European Union want to block any deal on citizens' rights. And kind of bear in mind, there are 3 million plus EU migrant passport holders living permanently in the United Kingdom, and around about 1 million, it may be fewer, but around about 1 million UK nationals living in the European Union. And one of the easy things that I thought Mrs May kind of thought very quickly that we get sorted out is to agree some reciprocal rights based on history. And yet the Telegraph not only report the story that the EU want to stop this from happening, but they say in documents seen by this newspaper, we see that the EU had privately decided to block any deal which I find to be remarkable. Well, fortunately, to back me up on this, I've got from the Daily Telegraph their deputy political editor, Stephen Swinford. Stephen, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
Well, I'm well, but I obviously am a pro-Brexiteer, and I'd kind of hoped for a long time that maybe common sense would prevail, given that they sell us a lot more than we sell them. But it doesn't look like it. Stephen, explain to me what these documents are that the Telegraph has seen that want to block any sensible deal for British people's rights living in the European Union.
Well, until now, Nigel, we've seen the EU trying to take a moral high ground on the issue of migrant rights. They've said it's all our fault, we're leaving the European Union, and we're using them as bargaining chips in negotiations. In fact, what we've learned over the weekend and this morning is that the opposite is true, that Theresa May has been trying to secure an early deal, as you say, and we discovered that there was a meeting at the European Council on April the 11th, which concluded that an early deal was not in fact feasible, that they couldn't do it. Now, they tried to keep this meeting under wraps. There were no minutes published of it. Nothing was known about it. We got hold of the minutes and ran them today, and these documents show that it is the European Union and not Britain that is blocking an early deal on migrant rights.
That in itself is pretty astonishing, isn't it? Because, as you say, they have been trying to, claim the high moral ground. How is it in the European Union's interests to start these negotiations off so badly that all it can lead to is a row and possibly the United Kingdom walking away from the table? Or is the timing of this, and this is my view, Steve, and I'm going to ask you what you think, is the timing of all of this something to do with an election that is taking place next Sunday in France?
You may well be right, and several people have been pointing out to us that the way that the European Union and Juncker's advisors appear to be behaving over this meeting is so destructive. It's as if they want to deliberately undermine Brexit negotiations, that they want to punish Britain, and this including over the issue, it seems, of migrant rights.
And is that because they're scared? Is that because they're scared that if Britain is seen to have been to be treated reasonably, that maybe Marine Le Pen's strategy of her own renegotiation, followed by a Frexit referendum, becomes somewhat more attractive?
Martin Selmayr, who is Jean-Claude Juncker's main advisor and many seen as one of the key figures behind this, is really worried about the prospect of other nations leaving the European Union. And he has suggested that the prospect of Marine Le Pen getting elected would be a horror show, he said last year on Twitter. So I think you're right. The man himself has said it, and they have real concerns about it.
Yeah, well, I've no doubt about one thing, Stephen, that if whatever margin, if Macron wins on Sunday, they will claim it as a great victory for the European Union, whereas I think what I'm seeing is Euroscepticism growing absolutely everywhere. What does Theresa May, assuming she wins a large majority, what do you think Theresa May's negotiating position is with a large majority? Will she be able to come back and counter in a tougher way?
I think she will. I think she'll be able to go to the table and say, look, I have secured a very significant mandate. It will be at a time of uncertainty in two of the main members of the European Union, France and Germany, who have both got elections of their own. So you'll have Theresa sitting there saying, I have secured a mandate. You have to listen to my demands and you have to listen to what we want.
Terrific. Stephen Swinford, Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for the inside story. Well, interesting, isn't it? Stephen Swinford making the point that it's the EU who've tried to claim the high moral ground, whilst all the while they've actually been trying to stop a reasonable reciprocal deal for our nationals living in Europe and their nationals living in this country. And I wonder, you're listening to this show, you voted Remain. You may have thought over the years that the European project was all about peace and harmony and cooperation. And I just wonder, how do you feel when you hear a story like this? Does it change your opinion of the European Union? And if you think, well, actually, I think Juncker and co are behaving abominably, then you can call me on 0345 6060973. You may say it makes no difference because actually they're just playing games ahead of the French election, in which case you can text on 84850. Or you may say, no, I understand why they're doing this, and I think the European Union are right, in which case, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, you can tweet at LBC, and as ever, you can watch us on LBC's Facebook page live. I'm going to ask Dominic in Sidcup, what do you think about Mr Juncker and Mr Selmayr's behaviour?
I think Juncker's got good afternoon, Nigel.
Good afternoon.
I think they've got a stronger point in. He has a strong point. We need to have EU citizens coming for certain economies to flourish, and they also need to have us coming to them. It's trying to show a stronger hand in the Brexit talks and trying to sort of threaten us, like possibly Theresa May did at the beginning. I think she was kind of wrong to threaten Europe that they wouldn't be able to protect the European rights, where really she would be protecting them. Because
Well, what Theresa May... personally, Dominic, I thought Theresa May should have conceded this point and that we should have publicly claimed the high moral ground rather than privately. But she didn't do that. But thus far, the only even veiled threat that Theresa May has made in public is to say, look, unless we come to a good deal, then it may be more difficult to have sensible cooperation on counter-terrorism and security. And the other way, we're being told there's a bill for 52 billion quid that they can't tell us where they've got the figures from. We're being told that we'll be blocked from having a trade deal. We're being told that even to contemplate a trade deal, we would have to conform to European rules for years to come. And we're being told we can't even enter into negotiations with other countries in the world. So it's pretty one way, Dominic, isn't it? Thus far.
I think that's more threatening. I think the talks haven't started, and that's the biggest thing. Currently, the only thing that's happened is over dinner, and no one really knows what went on over dinner. It wasn't publicised, so that's the big issue.
Well, it was. Hang on, it was publicised.
It was publicised, but only in a more scandal way, in a more in the private. So it wasn't actually true. No one knows what they said, and the same way Theresa May is now saying, "Well, I don't remember hearing that being said, but I won't say no to it." So who's telling the truth?
There's always he said, she said, and I get that, and I understand that, but. Didn't the fact that a German newspaper covered so much detail about that dinner, doesn't it show that actually no negotiations with these people are going to be conducted in good faith?
No, because they're both on the opposite side of the table. I think German newspapers haven't favoured you either much.
Well, I know that.
Yeah.
I'm well aware of what the German media have said about me. Dominic, I'm just making the case that I think... of course, there is give and take in any form of negotiation. And thus far, what we've seen from Juncker and the gang is sheer bull-headedness. Dominic, I thank you. I go to Trevor in Wembley. So, all these threats, Trevor, from the European Union, do they mean it or are they bluffing?
I think they mean it, actually. Although I can't be sure. You have to take his word for it. And I'm inclined to believe him, actually, and because I really think Theresa May is just full of hot air.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. She's just bluffing, because she's trying to secure a victory, obviously at the upcoming general election, and at the same time she wants to obviously convince everyone that she can get the best deal possible from the EU, but I don't think she can.
But the EU, Trevor, in their behaviour so far, leaking private conversations, threatening the rights of citizens, giving us impossible bills to pay, which they can't justify. I mean, surely, actually, at the moment, we're the good guys, aren't we?
Yes and no. I think it's really unfair the way the EU has been demonised, and I have to say, Nigel, actually, from UKIP especially.
Yeah. Well, I think
they were at the forefront of getting to leave the EU.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really unfair.
Well, one of the reasons, Trevor, I wanted to leave the EU is I know these people. I know how thoroughly dishonest they are. I know they're prepared to do anything to defend their failing political project.
Yeah, but you say dishonest. How can you say that, Nigel? That's a bit extreme, isn't it? Because, I'm sure there's a lot of dishonesty in this country.
Oh, of course there is, Trevor. And no country is perfect. But under our system of government, you can kick them out and replace them with somebody else. The point about the EU is the real power brokers are beyond the electorate. Mr. Juncker was not put in place by the electorate and can't be removed. Trevor, I thank you. All views welcome on this. Please come on and challenge mine. Right now you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. Well, in the face of the Brexit negotiations, the Daily Telegraph reveal they've seen secret documents that show that the EU have privately decided to block any deal to guarantee the rights of UK citizens living in the European Union and, of course, the reciprocity that would come for the over 3 million EU citizens living in our country. It is truly extraordinary when it was them, actually, that was accusing Theresa May of not being reasonable. And I've said already, they're asking for a fortune. They're trying to stop us reaching out to speak to other parts of the world. They want us, after we've left, to maintain all their rules. And worse than that, they've effectively given the Spanish a veto over Gibraltar. And worst of all, in my opinion, worst of all, the EU have indicated that if Northern Ireland were to opt to leave the United Kingdom and join up with ERA, there would be absolutely no problem in a new United Ireland virtually automatically becoming a member of the European Union. So what they are doing to try to make Brexit negotiations difficult for this government is they are prepared to stoke Irish nationalism and all that could come with that. I have to say, I think that perhaps is the most contemptible thing that I've heard so far. And Ant says to me on Twitter, he says, it seems that Juncker and the gang are taking Brexit seriously. We should just tell them to get stuffed and simply walk away. Well, that isn't actually what any of us wanted from the outset of this process, but goodness me, it's deteriorating pretty quickly. And in response to all of this, Theresa May, the Prime Minister, was forced to respond today, and this is what she said.
Now, during the Conservative Party leadership campaign, I was described by one of my colleagues as a bloody difficult woman. And I said at the time, the next person to find that out will be Jean-Claude Juncker. If you look at the guidelines that the EU has set out, they say in those guidelines that they want to see an early agreement with us on the whole question of the rights and status of EU citizens living here and UK citizens. I have always said that I want that to be dealt with at an early stage. I continue to say that. I said that in the Article 50 letter. The European Union has responded in their guidelines by saying similarly that that should be an issue that we address at an early stage.
Is it remotely feasible?
The bloody difficult woman was a comment, I think, made by Ken Clarke, who was comparing, and then he said, well, we cope with Margaret Thatcher, I'm sure we can cope with her. Well, if Theresa May goes over there and behaves like Margaret Thatcher, maybe they will have a bit of a problem. But it does seem to me that the way the EU have behaved over the course of the last few weeks is they're virtually trying to make it impossible for any deal to happen. And I'm still going to stick with my theory, and my theory is they are petrified of Marine Le Pen's Frexit agenda following a renegotiation, and they will do anything they can between now and next Sunday to say that this is a prison that you're not allowed to leave. Maybe they'll become moderate and sensible afterwards. I don't know. Delightful SMS from John in Sevenoaks, who says, Farage, if UK... That's always a clue, isn't it? When they use surnames, it's always a clue. Farage, if UK citizens have a problem living in EU countries, you will be hunted down like a wild animal. Whether this is hate speech or not, I don't know. But John, thank you for being so absolutely mature and reasonable in terms of your political debate. I love it. Peter on Facebook suggests that the EU are not united on this issue. Well, I don't think the EU member states necessarily are, but I think the European Commission does appear to be. Sue says, I've never heard anything like the controversy Brexit has caused. What's going on? We voted to leave, so what's the problem? The problem is the deal. And Rob says, no deal is better than a Juncker deal. I'm going to ask Steve in Camden. You know, a lot of people voted Remain, believing this project to be a project of peace, friendship, something that would bring all the peoples of Europe together. And I wonder, are people going to be shocked by what they've heard today?
I think not. I think they're getting used to the kind of internecine start happening, and I would be surprised if Mrs. May doesn't pick up a few extra supporters through the fact that she's managing it in a fairly sensible way. And even though she's switched sides, or so it would appear, I'm not sure that a lot of people that voted for Remain weren't entirely convinced about either which way to go. I don't think it was a very clear cut. I think it was a 40, maybe a 30-70 thing that you could persuade yourself was 5-45 or 60-40. You know, it was not clear. There seemed to be so many advantages we'd got used to.
Yeah, but I mean, Steve, as I say, the point I'm making is that the pro-EU side talk about peace and love and harmony and us all being one big happy family, and yet the behaviour that we've seen from them over the last couple of weeks doesn't really indicate that, does it?
No, they're totally in denial, because I find that my continental friends think we're absolutely crackers. How can we possibly have the temerity to suggest that this thing should now be threatened by us leaving? And it will be, because we've been propping it up.
Yeah, well, we certainly have. Well, taxpayers' money certainly has, Steve. Steve, I thank you, Steve, for the call. And a point Steve makes there, which ironically is a very good one, is everything that Juncker has said, that the leaks in the newspapers have shown, that the Daily Telegraph story today shows, all of it can only help Mrs May in the election, not damage Mrs May. So I wonder whether, I wonder whether the European Union have got this strategy right, or is it just a question of they are so frightened of what Le Pen can do this Sunday? So I'm saying, folks, that actually the European Union is proving itself not to be a very nice organisation. If you disagree with that, call me on 0345 60 60 973. And I'm going to go to Valentine in Bromley. Valentine, were you a Remain voter?
Yes, I was a Remain voter, and the reason I voted to Remain, part of it was because I knew that the EU would not be bluffing come, this scenario whereby we're having to negotiate our exit. Their four principles of EU membership is key to their survival, and they wouldn't want any sort of deal that incentivised other EU nations to want to leave. So that they've almost had to stop and contain.
Yeah.
And that's why they're being so stern with us. Now, Theresa May would know this going into these negotiations, and yet she will, as you can see, she will say that, Brexit means Brexit, and, when she's speaking in the media, she will do anything she can to appear strong and win votes. But ultimately, the EU won't have a situation whereby we can get a better deal than the members inside. So it means that her negotiations are flawed. Nothing's going to happen. We ultimately will have a hard Brexit the way things are going. And that's only going to be a problem for the UK.
But Valentine, you said they're being stern. I put it to you, they're being totally unreasonable.
Well, ultimately, they've got to survive as a political bloc, and their survival is ultimately threatened if we get a good deal. And we voted in the referendum politically and not economically, because common sense says that we will suffer some detriment, whether it's 3 years, whether it's 10 years, whether it's 20 years, but we will suffer. And many people...
Well, equally, Valentine, you could argue that common sense says that freeing yourself up to the 85% of the global economy that's not in the EU, you could be better off. I mean, you could argue that either way, couldn't you? But I do agree with you, Valentine, totally, that ultimately what we did was to take a political decision about our future. And I do agree with you that they are scared that us leaving could bring down the whole house of cards. And Valentine, I thank you for your call. It's interesting. The last time I was there in the European Parliament, all the talk was about Brussels. All the talk was about the European Union. Nothing about the member states at all. I wonder what Nick in Whitechapel makes of this.
Well, Nigel, I can't work out why you're so surprised. This is an organisation, and I did waver as to whether to vote to leave, and I came down the leave side in the end.
Yeah.
But an organisation that has always put its own survival and interests above the opportunities for its citizens. And you've got to look at Greece and Spain and Portugal to see that they have plunged those economies into dire problems to keep their own political project alive. And this is form. The EU always leak all this stuff about what happened at dinner and all the rest of it. So I'm not surprised that it's going on. And I agree with the last caller. In the end, no matter what they say, I really do believe they're going to want to punish us. The only upside, I don't know if you agree with this, is I think the individual governments, Poland and Spain, all the other countries,
may have a slightly different view when their own lobbyists and special interests and unions get involved.
I agree with that,
German
Nick.
car makers,
No,
the French.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think what the British government should be doing is launching a massive PR campaign right across Europe to people who make cars, manufacture wine, produce chocolate, to say, look, your politicians in the European Union are putting the interests of their failing project above your jobs and above your security. That, Nick, surely would work, wouldn't it?
Well, I think so, because at the end of the day, most people, we didn't naturally just vote on economics in this one, because I think there was, actually a democratic deficit. That was what really stuck out for me.
Yes, but actually, but Nick, that is politics, isn't it? That is politics. That was part of our political decision. Nick, I thank you for your call. The EU puts its own interests first, but though I am asked on by text, Nigel, no one is asking the most important question. Will we still be able to compete in the Eurovision Song Contest? I certainly hope not. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Moira Alls. Mr Juncker and the gang in Brussels want to do everything they can to stop a reasonable deal being done for British citizens living in the EU and EU citizens living here. Whether this is really part of their long-term strategy, whether they're just trying to stop Le Pen on Sunday, remains to be seen. But the story that is dominating absolutely everything today was the interview with Diane Abbott this morning here in this very studio with Nick Ferrari. And there are many people out there describing this as one of the great election disasters. Others will be more generous, and I know that Diane Abbott since has been attempting to defend herself. With me is Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Tell us all.
When Diane met Nick may come to be one of the defining moments of this election, Nigel. Of course, Diane Abbott's car crash interview with Nick Ferrari this morning, which made most people want to hide behind the sofa and pull a cushion over their heads. To say it was cringeworthy, well, it doesn't do it justice.
If we recruit the 10,000 police men and women over a 4-year period, we believe it'll be about £300,000.
£300,000 for
Sorry,
10,000 police officers. What are you paying them?
No, I mean, sorry.
How much will they cost?
They will cost. It will cost about £80 million.
About £80 million.
Yeah.
Theo, it can't get worse than this, can it?
That works out as new recruits being paid £8,000 a year, well below the minimum wage. Needless to say, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, found himself inundated with questions just a few moments afterwards about his shadow Home Secretary during a visit to Southampton.
Diane Abbott was just on the radio earlier saying it would be 80 million. In fact, she got a bit confused saying 300,000, then 80 million, but you're saying it's 300 million.
She corrected the figure, and that's the figure, and it will be paid for by not going ahead with the cuts in capital gains tax.
And is it a bit embarrassing that your shadow Home Secretary got the numbers wrong? It's obviously trying to get voters to put their trust in you in this election.
Not at all. We've corrected the figure, and it will be absolutely clear now, today, and in the manifesto. I'm not embarrassed in the slightest.
At lunchtime, Diane Abbott was back in the television studios, desperately trying to make amends. Her excuse, she'd done lots of interviews this morning and simply lost her footing under interrogation from Nick Ferrari.
I do know my figures, and as you will know, I did 7 interviews that morning, and that was the 7th, and I misspoke, but I do know my figures.
No, was that true?
No. Diane Abbott did 5 proper interviews and 2 clips. You know, Nigel, you've been around the block in terms of media rounds,
sure.
That an interview is very different from a clip for bulletins and pre-recorded packages compared to, of course, a proper interview. What's more, her interview with LBC was, in fact, the 3rd of 5. Of course, the Tories have decided this evening to wade into the row. This is what the Prime Minister, Theresa May, had to say during a campaign event in Bristol.
Now, you mentioned the figures that Diane Abbott has used this morning. I mean, I think she was suggesting you could employ a police officer for £8,000 a head. I think she needs to go and have another look at her figures. But if I can just say this, I mean, people are laughing at this, but actually this is very serious. Diane Abbott wants to be Home Secretary in our country. I think that shows people yet again the very clear choice between the strong and stable leadership of a Conservative party in government and the coalition of chaos that would be under Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I've got a wonderful Facebook message that Chris has just sent in. He says, I'm really rubbish at maths, but listening to Abbott, wow, I'm bloody Einstein. Given that this story has dominated absolutely everything today, can you please try and tell us on what I think is the first proper day of campaigning in the general election with that bank holiday out of the way? What else has been happening around the country?
Tim Farron was in Lewes, Sussex today. The seat was held by former Liberal Democrat Home Office Minister Norman Baker until he lost it 2 years ago to Maria Caulfield, the Tory. Mr Farron was joined by the party's candidate in the town, Kelly Marie Blundell, and the party's battle bus. The Tories have been focusing on the southwest. They currently hold all 6 seats in Devon and Cornwall, but they face a severe threat from the Liberal Democrats, and that's why the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has been there drinking tea and eating chips. Some people wondering about that combination, whether the two go together. A quiet day for UKIP, but tomorrow there's going to be a big important announcement from its leader, Paul Nuttall, on foreign aid. Britain currently spends 0.7% of its GDP on foreign aid, and I'm told that Paul Nuttall will announce that he plans to cut that requirement to 0.2%.
Theo, thank you very much indeed, and we've got 36 more days of this, so we'll see more of you. Thank you. It has been really quite an exciting day, depending on your perspective. I do genuinely wonder whether that may prove to be one of the biggest moments of the whole general election. But back to our conversation, back to the fact that despite trying to claim the high moral ground and saying beastly things about the British, all the way through this, there'd been a secret plan that the EU at this stage was not going to recognise the rights of up to 1 million British people living in European Union countries. And I'm asking you, particularly Remainers, I'm asking you, does this change your view of the European Union? They've always sold themselves as being about love and peace, but actually in many ways their behaviour doesn't justify that particularly. I'm going to ask Jackie in Winchmore. Jackie, what do you think about the EU's moves on this?
I think it's really, really bad. I just want to say that I just want to say that I want to thank you very much for everything that you've done, and it's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Well, maybe it's my fault, Jackie. They're being so rude about us,
I don't think so. I don't think so, because to me, I just feel that for the last 800 years, we've all our wars over Europe, we've never been that close to them. We've tried. Obviously, we can do so much with trade, etc., but there'll always be that little chip on the shoulder with them.
But Jackie, put yourself... I mean, Theresa May's responded, hasn't she, by saying, I'm going to be a bloody difficult woman, Juncker's going to find out. Do you think there comes a point in this where maybe the renegotiation becomes literally impossible because of their behaviour?
It could well do. It could well do. I could see that coming. They'll just make things go on and on and on, I think, indefinitely, as long as they can, and string things out and just be awkward all the time. That's the way I've always seen them, as not our particular friends. I know they're just across the border there, but...
So, Jackie, you're sort of saying leave at any cost, yeah? Whatever it is, let's just leave.
Yes.
Fine. You couldn't be clearer about that, Jackie. I thank you. I wonder what Adam in Leeds thinks about the EU
Nigel,
playing tough with us.
Good evening.
Good
Nigel,
evening.
Basically, you keep telling us that they need us more than we need them. Basically, that's wrong information. That's 500 million, 69 million. So, well, do the calculation. Okay, we send 55% of our trade to them.
No, we don't.
They're not scared from us.
No, we
They're
don't.
not scared from us. It took them 60 seconds to decide how they're going to deal with us, okay? And they have their plans ready for us, A, B, C, and D. Our government don't have any plan at all how they're going to deal with them.
Well, Adam, let's just make a couple of points, shall we? Number one, we're members of a club that we pay a net £10 billion a year into. OK, that's point number one. Point number two, they trade with us at a surplus, at a profit of about 80 billion sterling every year. There was an argument made that if we weren't in the EU and all trade ceased, which of course is nonsense anyway, but all trade ceased, that maybe 3 million British people might lose their jobs. Well, in that case, about 5.5 million people in the EU might lose their jobs. And I think when it comes to cooperation on security and other issues like that, we put a lot more into the pot than we take out of it, and I jolly well hope we'll do the same after we've left the EU. So the point I'm making, Adam, is that in economic terms, we are a very, very good marketplace for them. Surely that's logical.
Yeah, we are a good market. But I'll tell you a fact. German car maker like a BMW, they're not going to be scared if we're going to actually not going to have a deal with the European Union, because they can move their plant somewhere else. But we will still buy their cars, even if they put the price up for us, because they're the best car.
Well, actually, Adam, you've just made the argument. You've just made the argument for not needing trade deals at all. Because whether a tariff is 2% or in the case of a motor car, it could be 10%. You know, if people like a product and trust its price, they will buy it anyway. Adam, what I've been arguing the case for economic logic. But I do think that politically they're very, very scared of us indeed. And, you know, we've discussed this already this evening, but actually there are many there who believe that the European project matters more than the well-being of their citizens. How do you respond to that, Adam?
No, it's not. That's not the real fact, because if we go out from the club, so we're going to end up, the people we're going to end up paying more than we're actually paying now. So why do you want to have, after being in this club since 1948, you want to move now where it's going to cost you a lot of money to go out first, and it's going to cost us more money to buy our stuff from European Union?
Because, Adam, I want to be a free democratic nation. But thank you very much for your call. On text I get, maybe Diane Abbott was ill today, but didn't want to repeat her recent disgraceful Craven performance, says Damien in Whitechapel. Never thought I'd agree with you, Nigel, but you're right. Juncker is insufferable. I was a pro-Remain unionist, but these elites cause Brexit. The contempt for democracy is awful. Let's just walk away from this disgraceful union. That's interesting, isn't it? That somebody that was a Remainer now just thinks the whole thing's hopeless. Let's just walk. And I'm told on Twitter that if Europe unravels, it would lead to recession, a big recession, damaging living standards. Well, it might and it might not. Right now, you're listening to a Nigel Farage show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:46. Well, just 2 weeks ago in the European Parliament, I said they were behaving like the mafia, and I was told off by the President of the Parliament, and I withdrew and said no gangsters, because they're giving us potential exit terms, that are completely and wholly unreasonable. And I'm asking you tonight, particularly if you were a Remain voter, whether you're shocked about this and whether it changes your view. But equally, leavers, of course, are welcome too. And I'm going to Steve, who comes from, I think, the most Eurosceptic constituency in the country of Clacton-on-Sea. Steve, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Aren't you fed up with trying to educate people on the European rules?
Well, the funny thing is, Steve, there are no rules, because they make them up as they go along.
I know, because they do, yeah. Look, my main point is, obviously, this £50 billion, which is supposed to be a thing that they say we've got to have up front, where it's come from, we don't know. But can I ask you for your opinion? If it was another country that wasn't a net contributor, right?
Yep.
The most beneficial country, I think, is Poland. No disregard to Poland. But if they were to say we're leaving the European Union, would then the EU say, OK, well, if you're going to leave, we will give you 20 billion euros because you're leaving?
Yeah,
because we keep giving you money. This is the point I'm trying to make.
What, like a redundancy payment, you mean?
Exactly, yes.
I can't see it happening in a hurry, Steve.
No, I can't, but this is what I'm saying. So where do they get this 50 billion from? And to say that they're trying to stop other countries leaving the EU, why would these other countries want to leave the EU when they're giving them money hand over fist?
Because there's more to life than just getting money. There's more to life. You know, if someone bribes you to give away your liberty, your independence and your freedom, you're a fool to accept the money, in my opinion.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, and that's the point. Twice the other week, I asked Monsieur Barnier, who was the Commission's chief negotiator, twice I said, where does this figure of 52 billion come from? Hasn't it just been plucked out of the air? And all I got was a sort of little smile and no attempt to explain it whatsoever. But, Steve, let me tell you something. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be back in Strasbourg, in the European Parliament, sitting next to Mr Juncker, and I think I might just have one or two things to say. They are behaving utterly disgracefully, Steve.
Well, exactly. They're showing their true colours now, aren't they?
Well, you as a Leaver think that, but what I'm really interested in is what Remainers think, and I'm beginning, and I'm sure some, Steve, will vehemently disagree with you and disagree with me, but we're seeing some evidence tonight that actually Remainers are a bit shocked by this. Steve, I thank you very much for your call. I go to Andrew in Hounslow. Good evening.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
I'm a Remainer.
Yes.
I'm still a Remainer. Ultimate respect for you, because you speak with charisma and you speak your mind, which is something what's lacking. I would say that principles are very expensive. And yes, we have principles as British people, which is good. But in this case, I think it's not perhaps the best course. I don't think the EU is scared. I think they're stunned. I think they want us to let us see what the possible implications of Brexit are. For example, the border, which is very easy to move from France to Britain, would see us swamped. They can impose extremely attractive deals for companies to leave us. Say, for example, an airport...
So, Andrew, hang on. So are you saying these really are nasty people?
I don't think so. I think they're just stunned, and they wanted to see what the implications of antagonising them are. And we really need to look at it, the point that we're a smaller nation than the actual group itself, and we need to negotiate.
But I think, Andrew, you're actually making a very powerful argument for leaving. You're saying...
I don't think so, no.
Well, what effectively you're saying is that if any country has the temerity to say it wants to run its own affairs and not be part of this union, that they could do terrible things to them because they're big and we're small.
No, it's about markets. At the end of the day, we're employed by markets. We've seen the pound fall, which means which means inflation will rise in the medium term to long term, which means interest rates will go up to combat that. That is something they're doing. My mother lives in the south of France.
Mm.
You know, she has the ultimate medical care, bless her. And the problem is that people are selling around her. British people are selling around her, and they're getting offers on the telephone without even seeing the property because they know the British are running scared.
Well, but they shouldn't be running scared. In a grown-up world, Andrew, they shouldn't be running scared. Do you know something? What we voted to do, Andrew, was we voted to leave political union. Not to completely cast Europe away. We want to be friends and neighbours. And I think the fact that Mr Juncker deliberately won't guarantee the rights of people like your mother, frankly, Andrew, I think it's disgraceful.
But this originated in our House of Commons, where we wouldn't sort of guarantee the people of the EU that are here. I have colleagues at work who are worried, which is horrific.
Well, Andrew, listen, Let's for once believe the Prime Minister when she says that she wasn't going to guarantee the rights of EU citizens here unless it was part of a reciprocal deal, and given there are 3 times the number of EU citizens here, at least 3 times the number, than there are British citizens living abroad, what Mrs May was trying to be reasonable. Andrew, let me just ask you one last question. Do you think their behaviour is reasonable and fair?
I think what they're trying to show us is the implications of our actions, antagonising to a certain degree when we're meant to be in negotiation, but also the fact that they could move the border is just, to me, abhorrent. I mean, I've driven to France loads of times.
Well, we could control our border, Andrew, couldn't we?
Not if people are waving them onto ferries and people like that. And I have nothing against immigration. And
do you know why the border's over there? Do you know why the border's over there? The border's over there because actually it was the ferry companies that wanted the border to be over there. So I understand that because it takes a big burden off the ferry companies. But Andrew, listen, we could talk all night. I thank you very much for your call. A staunch Remainer there. I get a delightful, I think rather good text here regarding Diane. At least it's a policy, more policy in one interview than Theresa May's whole campaign. What are you talking about? Strong and stable government, not a coalition of chaos. That's what it's all about. Now, I'm going to go to James in Geneva. James, you live in a country outside the European Union that quite often is threatened by the EU. How are they behaving towards the Brits?
Well, how is the EU behaving towards the Brits?
Yeah.
I think as expected. I mean, you know of all people that the EU will do their utmost to make the UK have a difficult exit. For all the political reasons we know, they're not going to make the Dutch and the French and any other country which is Eurosceptic make it look like a process which is easy. We'd be naive to think they're going to be reasonable to us. Being reasonable would just tempt other nations to go the same route. So this is what I expect to continue, for them to be hostile and aggressive and give us lousy terms. Because quite frankly, you know, even though you talk about on the trade, they'd be silly to shoot themselves in the foot. We've got to remember that the big trade deficit is spread over 27 countries. And so whilst
yeah, I get that, James. I get that, James. But we are still a big market, you know.
Yeah, but we're only about 8% of their business in terms of exports.
I tell you what. If you said to me as a car manufacturer or anything else, you could lose 8% of your business, I'd be terrified.
I agree with you. It is a lot, but this is a political decision, just like Brexit
Absolutely.
was a political decision. And
Absolutely.
that will outweigh the economic logic to some extent.
No, James, I understand that completely. I thank you for your call. And my final thought is summed up, actually, I think, by a text I've got here from Diane. She says, "Hi, Nigel. I voted Remain, but I am disgusted by the reported behaviour of the European Union. Could we just leave and refuse to pay any settlement costs?" Well, there is a Damascene conversion from a Remainer last time round. I think they're behaving appallingly. We shouldn't walk away just yet, but my goodness me, at some point we may have to be prepared to. Now, don't forget, there are 36 days to go until the general election. Plenty of time to make up your mind, to engage in the debate. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. We're going to talk about the election campaign. What do you make of it so?
The election is officially underway after Parliament was dissolved today, and the main parties have been setting out their main policies. Labour says it will stop accident and emergency departments in England from closing. The Conservatives say there's a £45 billion black hole in Labour's spending plans. UKIP leader today, Paul Nuttall, said voters have got to back them to make sure we get pressure on the government to get the right Brexit deal. And Lib Dem leader Tim Farron has been out and about meeting the public in Kidlington in Oxfordshire today, which led to a very extraordinary confrontation.
Absolute rubbish. You come out with this all the time, Mr. Farron. Come on. And you are an absolute disgrace.
How am I a disgrace, matey?
Yep. And I'm proud to have voted Leave.
You're very aggressive. You're a very aggressive man as well.
But have you got grandchildren?
Yes, I have got grandchildren.
Are you proud that they'll inherit a poorer, less
I'm proud that
secure
I'm proud that they'll be coming out of Britain, out of Europe. Well, I mean, and that we will have our own destiny. Do you not think and not have people tell us we're going to pay £100 billion to get out? If that's your policies, I hope you get beat. I hope you only get 6 seats.
Well, thank you very much. It's been nice to talk to you.
Can I just point out to you? That would never have happened to Theresa May because she doesn't talk to anybody normal. So God bless him.
Is he normal then, Tim?
He is a regular human being with an opinion, and I respect him. Don't boo him. We're not Corbyn. You know, we are open to the public. This is an election about changing Britain's future, and you don't do that without talking to people who disagree with you sometimes. Enough respect to the guy.
Actually, Tim Farron's got a point there, because he does go out into markets and meet the voters. Whereas, actually, I have to say, for everybody else, it's all pretty stage managed. And I know as a former party leader that people like Malcolm Baker, who was the man who was talking to Tim Farron, do occur all over the place. In fact, to be called a disgrace, let me tell you, I was called far worse than that. But it's very interesting. I've felt, myself, over the last couple of decades, that there's been a bit of a dislocation that's occurred between politicians and the people, the voters and our leaders. And given what Malcolm Baker said to Tim Farron today, and I'm not going to make him the whipping boy, this is about a far more general question. I want to ask you, if you were in front of a party leader, any party leader, what's the one thing you would say to them? And you're allowed to say which party leader it is and exactly what you would say. Would you confront them on Brexit, for argument's sake, on either side of the argument? If so, call me on 0345 60 60973. Perhaps you'd ask them about other policies, because maybe you're getting a bit bored that this election is dominated by Brexit, in which case you can text at 84850, and you may well want to use the opportunity to say, why don't you actually ever listen to anything we say? And if you want to do that, you can tweet, using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch the show as ever on LBC's page right now. And Jeff in Reddit. So, Jeff, it's your big chance, matey. You are in front of a party leader. Which one and what would you say?
It'd have to be Theresa May.
Yep.
And I know she's tried very hard today to rebuff the EU people. But I would probably ask a question of the people in the EU, a commercial question, really. Have you ever had a set of your accounts audited over the last 20 years? And if you haven't, how would you propose to produce an invoice?
So, Jeff, you want to meet Jean-Claude Juncker, don't you, really?
Well, not really, because, I realise David Cameron didn't want to meet him.
Well, David Cameron, of course, tried to veto him becoming president of the Commission. So you would say, for 20 years in a row, your accounts have not been signed. Why on earth should we go on paying net £30 million a day? Have I got you, Jeff, roughly in there?
You roughly got me there, sir.
Right. So are you angrier, Jeff, with EU bureaucrats and politicians than you are with UK politicians?
Very much angry with the EU politicians, yeah.
So you were a Brexit voter, I guess?
I was a Brexit voter.
And what would you have told Tim Farron today?
Well, Tim Farron's got a problem. He's in favour of the EU. I voted to go into the common market as a trade unionist many years ago. When Mr. Heath was around, and he never told me I've got to have a political union. And since then, I've never really been given the opportunity to actually turn around and say, I don't want this. I never voted for this in the first place. So as far as the EU people go, that ain't what I voted for, but that's what I've ended up with.
Jeff, very good. Mr. Juncker, if you're listening, avoid Redditch. Otherwise, you'll meet Jeff in the street. I want to hear from all of you. Whatever your views are, please get involved in this debate. And you can agree with me, you can vehemently disagree with me, but you will have your chance on this show to get heard. So Jeff wants to bash a bureaucrat. And I wasn't necessarily expecting that reaction, but I do understand it. Graham in Hay on Wye, who would you like to meet and what would you like to say?
Hello, Nigel. I would love to meet Tim Farron, who wants to give the people another referendum and a chance to remain. I would like to ask him exactly what Remain is he offering us. There was a lot of talk about what sort of Brexit we're going to get. What sort of Remain would we get? Would we still keep our rebate? Would we have to join the European army? Would we...
or the euro, Graham.
The euro, exactly. If we go slinking back with our tail between our legs, what sort of deal are we going to get? And is he going to give the people another referendum when we know what sort of deal we're going to have to accept with continuing bailing out of the euro, migration quotas, having to join the European army, all these sort of things.
You do make, Graham, a very valuable point, because in the referendum it was painted out that if you vote Brexit, it's a leap in the dark, but if you vote to remain, it'll be exactly as it is today. Whereas, of course, we know that the EU is evolving, the EU is attempting to centralise, and we never know what piece of legislation they might pass on our light bulbs or whatever it is next week. No, Graham, that's a perfectly fair point. But would you, Graham, agree with me and actually pay Tim Farron some credit for at least taking the risk of going out and meeting the public?
I do give him credit for that, and I think he handled it pretty well, actually. Although the chap obviously made a very valid point that I totally agree with, and Tim Farron couldn't really answer it, he at least did get some credit for saying, I'm speaking to real people, and gave that person some credit for standing up and giving his views.
Graham,
he handled it pretty well. I'll give him credit for that.
No, I agree with that. And when I was leader of UKIP, I used to go and meet the real public. I cannot tell you how many public houses I visited up and down the length and breadth of this country, and that's where I got my sort of focus group feedback. Some of it was lovely, bits of it weren't. Dean in Bromley, what would you like to ask anybody?
I would like to know that now we're no longer in Europe, will you be giving up your MEP pension?
No, I won't, Dean.
Oh.
Why should I?
Because you think that everything in Europe, the European Parliament, is rotten.
Oh, well, I don't deny for one moment that it's rotten. But, Dean, I would say this to you, that I gave up quite a well-paid job in business to do politics. I took a massive salary cut to do it, and the very least I owe to my family and to others is that when I croak it, which will probably be much earlier than most people given my lifestyle, that at least the family gets some money. That's not unreasonable, is it?
Does the pension carry on forever?
Well, if I die, then half of that pension will go to those that are left behind after me. And do I not owe it to them, having ruined their lives for 20 years doing this job, having through what I've done, had their privacy invaded, our income denuded? Wouldn't it be reasonable to say that they should get something after I'm gone?
Well, who's going to pay that pension pot if we're out of Europe?
Well, now that's really interesting, Dean, and I love that question. And at 7:30, I'm going to do a financial roundup on this. I was saying, Dean, on this show a couple of weeks ago, that Monsieur Barnier had plucked the figure of 60 billion euros out of the air. Well, today they played the Joker. And in cahoots with the Financial Times, and I'm not quite sure whose side they're on, but clearly not Britain's, they're saying it could be 100 billion. And, Dean, I'm going to go through at 7:30, after the news, exactly what I think our liabilities are, including pensions for MEPs and for former EU bureaucrats. Dean, you get a full answer in 20 minutes' time, and thank you very much indeed. I get a text here that says to me, I would ask about the House of Lords, the TV licence and our slow internet speed, says D in Kent. D, you clearly live in one of those nice leafy lanes where you have not got broadband. On Twitter, Bez says, I'd ask Mrs May, you called the general election, why are you not out campaigning? Well, for that matter, Bez, why are you not going to take part in the TV debates? And by the way, bit of news on that, folks, today. ITV have announced that on the 18th of May, they will hold a leaders' debate, as they did last time, with Julie Etchingham in the chair. They're inviting the leaders of all the big political parties, and it's entirely up to Mrs May whether she turns up or not. The BBC appear to have run away from this, and I just want to say right now, well done, ITV, for continuing with this, and I think Mrs May will be a diminished figure if she doesn't dare turn up. Middling on Twitter says, Nige, I like that. Political differences aside, wasn't it great to see Farage accept a different opinion earlier? Something few MPs do. Yes, 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 I agree. Full marks to Tim Farage for actually being out there and meeting the public. Grace in Ealing, who would you like to meet? What would you like to say?
I think that what I really want to know from lots of politicians is what their personal ultimate goals are. I want politicians who are trying to make things as fair as possible for as many people as possible, and I feel that the Tories say that they're concerned about the working classes, but their policies seem to show otherwise, and I'd really like to grill Theresa May about what her motives are, indeed why she's not out campaigning. If I got to meet Tim Farage, I'd ask him to clarify the sin issue a bit better, because I thought he did a shoddy job of trying to explain that theologically. But yeah, it would be really good for politicians to be clearer about what their personal reasons for being in politics are, because sometimes it seems that they're really fighting for justice and other times it doesn't.
Grace, I understand that completely. It's a very good question, and it reminds me of a morning in June 1999 when I woke up having slept for a full 80 or 90 minutes, and I'd been elected the night before as an MEP, and the phone rang, and it was a veteran journalist called Christopher Booker, who still writes for the Sunday Telegraph and still has a column in Private Eye. And Booker said to me, he said, Nigel, I've been writing about current affairs and politics for 40 years, and let me tell you, he said, there are two types of people in politics. There are those who want to be something, and there are those who want to do something. And you better make your mind up pretty quickly, young man, well, I was then, which one of those you are. And I, not that I needed it, but I decided I wasn't in it for rank, title or position. I was in it because I wanted to change things. And Grace, you're absolutely right. Asking that basic question about people's motivations would be a great question to ask, not one party leader, but actually all of them. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. Parliament has been dissolved. Theresa May has been to meet the Queen, not that she needed to, but she did. She gave a big stirring speech outside number 10 Downing Street. The election campaign is on. And in some ways, the highlight of the day was Mr. Malcolm Baker in Oxford, or a suburb of Oxford, meeting Tim Farron and telling him what he thought about Brexit and everything else. And I'm asking you, if you were to meet a leading politician, what would you say to them? And I want to hear all of your views on this and any other subject. I'm here for you to challenge me and to get involved in the debate. Do you think politicians are connected to us? Do you think maybe the referendum last year made politics more real? Do they look more human and normal to you? Michael in Swansea, who would you want to meet and what would you want to say?
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I would ask Theresa May how easy it was for her to change from a Remain supporter in the referendum to now a hardline Brexiteer.
In fact, Michael, so hardline that in her speech today outside Number 10, she said, "I believe in Britain," which was my general election campaign slogan in 2015. It is a remarkable 180-degree turn, isn't it?
Indeed it is.
What do you think she'd say?
She'd probably avoid the question completely.
I'm not sure, Michael, she'd even meet you.
Well,
I think she's going to.
Yeah.
I think she's going to play this very safe. I think she's going to play this campaign through the media. I think she's going to play it through soundbite and spin and messaging. And I doubt she'll do a walkabout in Swansea and take the risk that Tim Farron took. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe she will. Maybe Swansea is next on her list. And Michael, you can ask her that. But then again, and I have to try, because there's an election period on, I've got to try and be objective and balanced and fair. It could be, Michael, could it not, that rather than being just a cynical career politician going with the wind, that she's genuinely changed her mind?
I'm not sure. There was quite an incredible speed she managed to change her mind. It was quite sudden. If it was a gradual change to being a Brexiteer, then maybe I consider that. But
come on, St Paul was on the road to Damascus, and he changed, didn't he? Michael, I think you're a very deeply cynical human being. And I don't think you believe Theresa May's conversion to be real, do you?
No.
Thank you very much indeed for your call. I get another one. I would like to ask Mrs May, I get on text, why we cannot walk away from the EU right now, says BB. Well, actually, given the escalation of debate that's been going on today, that may well happen. I would like to ask Nicola Sturgeon, what's the difference between independence from the UK and not the EU, says Pete in Oxfordshire. Oh, and I love this one. Adrian, you are a star. This is, I'm going to predict already, the best message of the evening. Adrian says on Twitter, if I met Diane Abbott, I would ask her challenging questions, such as, what is 2 plus 2? Very good. I'm going to go to Sean in Harlesden. Sean, who would you like to meet? What would you like to ask?
I'd really like to meet you, and what I'd really like to ask is, why do you have to lie so much?
Oh, well, I'm not sure I do, Sean, but, I mean, if you can illustrate and give me examples, I mean, you're very happy to say it or put it in writing, and I'll do my best, you know.
Oh, here we go. You're very good at skirting around the question.
No, I'm not. Sean, ask me, I tell you what, old son, ask me a question, I'll answer it.
Right, I'll tell you what then. OK, here we go then. Let's point a couple of your lies out then, shall we?
Just do one. One at a time is the best way to deal with this.
All right then, just the one.
No, I did, Sean. Right. With respect, say one at a time. Who knows? We may keep you on the line for the rest of the show. Let's start with one.
All right then. Well, your lie about EU legislation makes things difficult for small businesses. So you explain this then. In accordance to you that it damages small businesses. In a 2013 YouGov poll of small to medium business owners, 71% of them said that the EU membership had a positive effect on the business, while only 13% of them reported a negative impact. But you have to ramp this up constantly, don't you? Like how you ramped up the £55 million a day to be an EU member. It's actually 2.5% of the annual budget, which works out at about, my maths is a bit bad here, but 20 billion a year. So educate.
Just ask Diane Abbott, Sean. She'll help you.
No, I'm asking you, mate.
John, the fact that very often people in small business weren't aware of what the EU was doing to
I've
them
got a small
does
business,
not.
and it's never harmed my small business, but Brexit's going to harm my small business. So,
Is it? So how much?
Yeah,
so you export to Europe, do you?
No, it's not that kind of small business.
Oh, I see. So
and it's legal before you say it. It's legal before you say.
It's legal. Good. I'm pleased to hear it.
My business. I'm here to talk about.
Well, you just did talk about your business.
Like how you talked about the 350 million to the NHS. Blatant lie. And then you backtrack on it on ITV this morning. Never said it.
No,
yeah,
Sean. Listen, old son, I never said it. But you tell me one outright lie I've told. Just one.
One outright lie. Bloody hell. All right, then staying in the EU.
Come on, let's just. I mean, don't use words like bloody. Only Theresa May is allowed to do things like that. You tell me one outright lie, Sean.
Well, to my nephew, I'm more important than Theresa May, and I wouldn't even trust Theresa May as far as I could throw her. Because going back to what that gentleman from Wales said before about how she said, I want to remain in Europe, and now she wants to leave Europe.
Sean, listen, mate, just because you don't like me, and that's absolutely fine,
you're amazing.
But I'm giving you an opportunity. I'm giving you, on air, far more time than I ought to say to you, ask me one simple question, and you're struggling to ask that question.
No, I'm asking you why you lie. I've just told you and you're not even giving me an answer.
Right, OK, Sean, you've asked a question. I'm going to answer it. I've done my absolute utmost.
No, you haven't.
Having come...
All right,
I haven't even finished yet. Well, there's no point asking a question and not waiting for the answer. Otherwise, we're all going to whistle in the wind, aren't we? Sean,
15 to 50%.
I've done my best to tell the truth as I see it, and I believed in it. I'm never going to convince you. But, Sean, the point is, if you get the opportunity to really have a go, you've got to be ready for it and prepared for it. And I'm sorry, I think, with all due respect, Sean, you failed the test. Nil point. We go to Peter in Godalming. Peter, who would you like to meet and what would you like to say?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
I would like to pose a question to Jeremy Corbyn, why it is he thinks it is acceptable for himself and Shadow Chancellor McDonnell to ally themselves with the British Communist Party, an ideology that is responsible for the death of many millions of people, and yet we brand people such as yourself as political extremists. Why are the media not asking him these questions?
I think, to be fair to Jeremy Corbyn, and I did hear the leader of, I think they're now called the New Communist Party of Great Britain, who did incidentally back Brexit as well. Anyway, but I think you'll find that it was the New Communist Party of Great Britain that have allied themselves to Corbyn's campaign and not the other way around, Peter, unless I'm wrong.
I mean, McDonald is a self-professed Marxist, and
yes.
And if the Labour Party were to gain power, they won't. But if they were to, we would see a Marxist in charge of the British economy. I mean, is this something that's beneficial to the British people? I don't think so.
Would you equally, Peter, ask him about his previous comments about Hamas, the IRA? I think to be fair, I think this particular question you've asked isn't actually on the money, because it's the Communist Party that have allied themselves to him. But it would be not unreasonable in the context of this election to ask him why he has
he
strange friends.
He tweeted on May Day to the May Day protests in London his solidarity to them. I mean, don't get me wrong, that might just be a gesture of goodwill. But regardless, I think it's not particularly good for someone to ally themselves with such an extreme political...
Peter, I get that. I understand that totally. But I would ask other callers to come on and tell me that actually Jeremy Corbyn is fully entitled to do those things. Steve in Stevenage, quickly. Who would you like to meet? What do you want to say?
Yeah, hello, Nigel. I'll ask Tim Farron. Given the unsustainable level of immigration and the housing crisis, I'd ask him, where's everybody going to live?
Well, they're going to build lots of new houses, Steve, is what Tim Farron would say, and you'd be satisfied, wouldn't you?
No, I don't think that would work, though, would it? Because we haven't got enough builders to build the houses that are being built now. So we'd have to import more people.
Steve, I can't see what the problem is. We only have to build one house every 4 minutes to cope with current levels of immigration.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Well, let's start. You start with one brick, right? I'll start with another.
Well,
and we'll see how many houses we can build between us.
Do you know what, Steve? You might get your chance, because Farron is going to tour market towns and constituencies all around this country. Stevenage may be on his list. You might get a chance to ask that question. Martin asks on Facebook, I would ask Mrs May if she thinks Britain needs strong and stable leadership. I love it. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for... A voter gets angry. Stroppy with Tim Farron in the streets of Oxfordshire today. And I'm asking you, who would you like to meet amongst our political leaders and what would you like to say? But a few little news roundups that I think may be of interest. The first is France. This Sunday is the second round of the French presidential elections. It's Emmanuel Macron against Marine Le Pen. And the opinion polls are shifting. They are changing, albeit still a big lead for Macron. But the last reputable poll we've got is Macron on 59%, Marine Le Pen on 41%, which is quite a significant narrowing of the gap since last week. Tonight, roughly at 9:30 UK time, they will go head-to-head live on French TV for a 2.5-hour debate. A fascinating election taking place there. But in Brexit news, well, firstly, the war of words that we talked about yesterday, with Juncker and Juncker's team briefing a German newspaper, leaking everything that was said at the Downing Street dinner, including abusing the chef and the food. And things today, I think, have really deteriorated because Juncker's chief of staff, a man called Martin Selmayr, who at one point used to drink in the same pub as me in Brussels, but I think he's boycotted it now. Martin Selmayr, who was a top aide to Juncker, and he has called today Brexit a sad and sorry event. He said Brexit will never become a success, and Mr. Juncker will never spend more than 30 minutes a week dealing with it. So the war of words gets worse and worse and worse. And how Juncker and Selmayr and all these people think by escalating this, they're somehow damaging Theresa May and damaging the British government, I don't know. I think with every utterance they give, they probably give her an opportunity to increase her majority at this election. But the really big story is we wake up this morning to be told that the Brexit bill has just doubled overnight. It's just become 100 billion euros that they want us to pay up front. This is according to FT calculations. Now, I'm not quite sure whose side the FT are on, though I have my suspicions. This, by the way, and if you want to read and see what your share price has done, or reports from currency markets or whatever, the FT is brilliant. Of course it is. But don't forget, this is the very same FT that advocated strongly that Britain join the euro, and thank goodness we didn't listen to them. Why are the FT, working with our enemies on this very issue to try and escalate the bill that they think would need to be paid? How relevant is it? Well, I've spoken on this before, but I just want to bring you up to speed on one or two of the points of law here. The European Union has what is called a multi-annual financial framework, and it runs for a 7-year period. The current one ends at the end of 2020. But Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which remember we triggered just a few weeks ago, is clear that the treaties shall cease to apply to a nation leaving the European Union. So, at worst, we could be considered to be expected to go on paying our bill until the end of 2020. Legally, under the treaty, we should stop paying anything at the end of March 2019. And please don't forget, folks, between the date that we voted for Brexit and the date we leave at the end of March 2019, we will have paid in net nearly 30 billion. Now, I was asked a question earlier about what ongoing liabilities there could be. And yes, there is a point here about pensions. Yes, there have been MEPs over the years, but more significantly, staff working in the European Parliament, and particularly the European Commission. And we, as a party, have looked at what the total pension bill is, what the percentage of employees that are British are, And we think there is an ongoing liability of somewhere between £2 and £3 billion a year. I re-emphasise £2 and £3 billion a year. And I would have thought what the British government should do is to take all those liabilities off the EU's books and add them to the British parliamentary and British civil servant scheme. So the idea that we should be effectively held to ransom for €100 billion is beginning to look totally and utterly ridiculous. And if any of you think I'm wrong on any of that, please call on 0345 60 60 973. But back to the main point, Farron at least having the guts to go and meet the voters and being challenged in the street. And I'm asking you, who would you like to meet and what would you like to say? And I'm going to ask Ramon in Bayswater who he would like to meet.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello.
Hi. I want to ask Jeremy Corbyn, obviously my party leader, why he's intent on trashing Tony Blair's record in government, when the whole point of fighting an election is to back up your record in government. I mean, whether you like or loathe Mr. Blair, which I know many people loathe him, he's the only Labour leader in 40 years who's known how to win a bloody election. And if you're going to trash the guy...
This word keeps coming back, doesn't it? It's Theresa May started something here. We're all saying bloody, and we've got to stop it. But, no, Ramon, we talked about Blair yesterday, and, he was a phenomenal election-winning machine. But
exactly.
But fair to say that Jeremy Corbyn voted against him on virtually everything, didn't he?
Yeah, but the whole point of winning elections is to back up what you did in government previous to that. But I don't see Theresa May trashing David Cameron's record, and I don't see Tim Farron trashing Nick Clegg's record.
No.
If you want to show the public why you want to win an election, you have to talk about your successes in government.
OK, Ramon, let's say that you are Ramon in Bayswater and I'm going to try and play Jeremy Corbyn, right? So you've asked me that question, and I'm going to answer, that's because it was an aberration that was called New Labour, and we've now returned to being a proper socialist party. What would you say to that?
Right, so what happened, where were you when we introduced the minimum wage, when we introduced a sure start for women? We got peace in Northern Ireland, we got devolution across the British Isles. Where were you? You voted for this. You might have voted against tuition fees, you might have voted against the Iraq and Afghanistan war, but for the benefits of, that we gave to this country, being the minimum wage, being devolution, being, all these other things, like sure start for women, and all these different things that New Labour did domestically, which I believe they were good things. I mean, I know you have a different opinion, obviously. But in terms of foreign policy, fine, it was trash.
Right.
But you have to talk about the things that you did domestically.
OK.
Otherwise, no one will know why you want power in this country. And he needs to talk about power as well, because in our party's constitution, the first term of our party's constitution is we are a political party that fights for office. We're not a pressure group. We're not an organisation. We're a force that fights for an election.
Yeah, no, Ramon, I completely understand that. Now, given that if you believe the polls, and they're often wrong, if you believe the polls, would you then be campaigning for Blair to take over as leader?
I wouldn't be campaigning for Blair to take over as leader, no. I'd be campaigning for, someone who's not a Blairite, but not a Corbynite either. So someone like Dan Jarvis, I think, would be the perfect candidate.
He's the ex-army officer who represents a seat in Barnsley somewhere, isn't he? Yeah.
Exactly. He's fought in 4 wars. What does that look like to working-class people who we've, quite frankly, lost? It shows that he's patriotic and that he puts his body on the line for the country.
I have a feeling, Ramon, that this is a debate we're going to be having before the end of June, and I thank you for your thoughts and your call. Sarah in Sanderstead, who would you like to meet, and what would you say?
Well, hello, good evening, Nigel. Very, very nice to speak to you. I'd like to meet Tim Farron because, first of all, he just talked over the top of the pensioner in Oxford earlier on, and then he said, we're going to be poorer, less secure, less powerful.
Oh, and your grandchildren, he said, didn't he?
Right.
Yes.
He said, have you got grandchildren?
Yes.
And the guy said, yes, I have, and I'm proud that I voted for them. And I've had this one flung at me. I've got grandchildren. And, of course, we're going to be more secure because we're going to have cooperation. And also, we will have more control over our borders. And as for poorer, well, James Dyson can't wait to start exporting to the Commonwealth countries. He's a great proponent of Brexit. And it's very interesting looking at the way the totalitarian Eurocrat bullies are behaving. They're coming out and showing what they really are like, the way they're speaking and blackmailing and threatening and intimidating. How dare they?
Well, I agree. They're being beastly, Sarah, aren't they?
Well, they're just showing. I mean, a good relationship should be one of mutual respect, and I do think that Theresa May has really tried to be respectful and clear and say we want to be allies, we want to work together, and then to get all this backlash is just shows what the sort of people they're like.
Well, and they're playing, Sarah, they're playing completely into her hands, and I thank you. Lloyd from Oxfordshire says, I'd like to ask Jeremy Corbyn how he expects to run the country when he can't even do his tie-up properly. Kathy in Southampton says, I would like to meet Mr Juncker and ask him why he doesn't grow up and accept that we are leaving. And Tanis on Facebook says, I'd like to ask Tony Blair how he sleeps at nights. I want to hear all your views, all your opinions. I'm here. Come and challenge me. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. Bit of a fisticuffs happened today between Tim Farron and a member of the public, and I'm asking you, who would you like to meet? Which political leader would you like to get face-to-face with, and what would you ask them? And Tim on Facebook says, I'd like to meet Theresa May and ask her if this whole general election is a Brexit delaying tactic. And Rob says, Nigel, I'd ask the top honchos at the EU if they have no understanding whatsoever of the British psyche and advise them that we really don't respond very well to attempted intimidation. Love it, Rob. Top stuff. Abraham in Stamford Hill, who would you like to meet and what would you like to say?
Hi, Nigel. I would like to meet you. First, I would like to say it's a great honour for me to speak to you.
Well, thank you very much.
I think it's a big shame that you are the leader of UKIP. I think you should now aim to become the leader of Conservative, being a more of a group that wins, and should become the leader and lead Britain, and you'll be the strongest leader I think Britain has ever had, will ever have. You're a person who knows you know what you're talking, and whatever you've aimed, whatever you've done, you've proven, and you always know how to bring these things right out. And I've watched debates, I've watched you speaking in the EU, and you always pinpoint, and it's a shame that a person like you is so talented and gifted.
Well, it's very kind of you, Abraham, but
not a leader of a group that can actually make a bigger difference.
But look, Abraham, whoa. Firstly, I agree with Groucho Marx. I'd never really want to join a club that would have me. But the point is that I left the Conservative Party 26 years ago because I felt that I could help to make a bigger difference from outside what was perceived to be the mainstream of politics. And I think to a certain extent I achieved that. And as for becoming leader of Conservatives, do you know what? They've got a leader at the moment who I think is the most popular there's almost ever been. So not much of a vacancy, but thank you for your sweet and kind words. Peter in Hackney, who would you like to meet?
Miss Abbott, or Mrs. Abbott, or whatever she calls herself.
The LBC star of yesterday, yeah.
That's correct. I mean, I live in Hackney, as you just said.
Yep.
And she says that she represents the people of Hackney, and how can she, with the comments that she comes out with? I mean, she puts her foot in it every time she goes. I mean, that is it. Why? I mean, when I was listening to her yesterday, it's only when I went on to see her on the morning show on the TV that I see that she keeps looking up at the sky. You know, she's looking up, as it was saying.
Well, she's looking for inspiration, Peter. You can't knock her for that, can you?
Well, it'd be nice if when she got her inspiration, it was something decent. I mean, to put her foot in it, Nick cut her right down to the quick yesterday.
Peter, tell me, have you ever met her?
And I wouldn't like to, because I know that I'm a forthright speaking person, and I know what I would say, because I remember years ago when she turned around and put her child into that private school down at Blackfriars.
Yeah.
And she says, I'm not bringing my kid up in Hackney. You know, so you should tell me. I mean, she's cock-a-hoot, you know, saying all socialists should go to state schools. and yet she immediately says, not all socialists, but not me.
Well, Peter, I appreciate your strong-held views, but the question I was asking was, who would you like to meet and what would you like to ask them? And you don't even want to meet her. That's how upset and angry you feel. On Twitter, I'm asked, my question to all candidates is, what is your renewable energy policy and the time frame? And John Shannon asks that. John, don't bother asking Donald Trump. That one is all I can say. And Anthony asked me on Facebook, he says, Dear Nicola Sturgeon, why do you want to leave one union for another? Very good. I'm going to go to Christian on the Isle of Wight. Christian, who would you like to meet?
Oh, hello, Nigel. Well, the person I'd like to meet, I'm talking to, so...
Very good. Well, you're here. Ask away.
Right, well, first of all, on a personal point of view, I'd like to echo what the gentleman, one person ago, said. It is an honour to meet you. I think you're doing a cracking job.
That's very kind.
To lay down your life for a cause and...
Oh, Christian, I'm still alive, mate.
Yeah, well, okay. To stand up for,
only just, but you know.
Well, let me just say it's very unusual for somebody with integrity to rise to the top in a mainstream party, as you know. You just explained why you.
Christian, you're sweet, but what is your question to me?
My question is this, and it's a genuine one from me. I keep on the ball with what's happening on the mainstream and also the alternative media. Global politics. And what I wanted to ask you is, could you just explain for me and the other listeners, because information is everything, education is everything, why staying as a member of the European Parliament, doing the cracking job you're doing there, which I watch all the videos, etc., do you not... How do you think that you wouldn't be better educating the English people from the in Parliament?
No, it's a very, very good question, Christian, and I'm going to give you a two-part answer. First part is, today, I was watching Rolling News today, and I saw a flash to a European Parliament committee where my old friend Guy Verhofstadt was speaking. I've never before seen a European Parliament committee being covered live on cable television in this country. And what that tells you, Christian, is that actually the emphasis over this whole Brexit process will be far more in the European Parliament than it will be in the United Kingdom Parliament. Part answer one. Part answer two is this. What could I do as a backbench MP in Westminster, perhaps being called twice a year for Prime Minister's questions, compared to leading a group in the European Parliament, sitting in seat number 20, with Mr Juncker in seat number 21, I think, Christian, I've got a much bigger, better stage to propel the Brexit arguments there than I've got here. And that is my answer to you.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. That's really opened my eyes. Basically, you're educating the rest of Europe, who perhaps see more of the European Parliament.
I think you will.
In Britain at the moment.
Yeah, Christian, believe you me, you are going to see an absolute load of the European Parliament in the next couple of years. I thank you ever so much for your kind sentiments, words, and your phone call. Chris in Slough, who do you want to meet?
I'd very much like to speak to Mr Juncker.
Right. Over a glass of something, perhaps, or?
Well, perhaps, yes. I'm sure he'd end up smashing it over my head, though. But do
you know what? Actually, Chris, do you know what? All the years I've been there, and I've done battle with the Barrosos and the Herman Van Rompuys and all those people, actually, even though I think Juncker's political behaviour is absolutely appalling, on a one-to-one, Chris, he's actually rather charming. He's actually rather charming.
Quite a gentleman, yeah. Now, what I would ask him is just exactly what is it you think you're doing? Coming out and threatening the people of Britain. We had that before Brexit. We had it from them. We had it from Barack Obama. And the British people don't take lightly to it.
He said, Chris, a few years ago, when he was president of the Eurogroup, and there was a big Euro crisis going on, Juncker after that said, when it gets serious, you have to lie. And I think in Juncker's mind...
I remember that.
I think in Juncker's mind, defending this European project matters more than the truth or anything else. And if he has to intimidate and threaten and bully, he will do it. Chris, I thank you for your call. I'm going to go to Barbara, my last caller of the evening. I'm going to go to Barbara in Edinburgh. Good evening, Barbara.
Nigel.
Who would you like to meet and what would you say?
Oh,
Jeremy Corbyn, I'd like to ask him if he thinks that Diane Abbott would appeal to the rest of Britain, because she may be popular in her own area, but I've got a feeling that the rest of Britain are not really she doesn't appeal to them, put it that way.
Do you think that yesterday's LBC interview really has done the Labour Party harm?
I do, yes. I mean, it is embarrassing. And also, he didn't, and Jeremy Corbyn himself, he should have just said it was embarrassing and that these things happen.
Do you know something, Barbara?
They handle things so badly.
Do you know something? Just occasionally in life, when things go really badly wrong, if you as a party leader hold your hands up and say, do you know what, we made a mess of it, I think the public would respect that more than a whole load of excuses which simply don't wash and don't work. Barbara, thank you for your call. Thank you, everybody, for your calls. My feeling on all of this is that the referendum last year made us feel much closer to politics. It made us feel much more involved. Indeed, in many ways, it made us feel more powerful. But I don't think it's brought us any closer to our political leaders whatsoever. And I'm going to say top marks to Tim Farron for actually being out there and meeting the public, because that's where you get nice things said and nasty things said. All our politicians should go out in this campaign and do this. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC, and I won't be on air tomorrow, first time this year, due to the local elections. However, I'm going to join Ian Dale and Sheila Fogarty at 10 p.m. tomorrow night for an election special show. I'll be on the panel with Michael Gove and Emily Thornberry. It should be fun. Coming up tonight at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you, and we're continuing the conversation after the news. So Theresa May has accused